Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Copilot Lead Speak, the security series where we talk to lots of different AI security experts from around the world about different aspects of AI security. I'm Sarah Young, your host. I'm a senior cloud security advocate, and today we're talking to Harriet.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here.
Harriet, this is a really exciting, busy space, but also, what is your background? How did you get into AI? Because for most of us, it's very new, but it sounds like you've been working in it for quite a long time.
You could say that. AI is definitely a very busy space. I guess you could say that I've worked in it for my entire career. I've spent the last 10 years working at the intersection of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, but of course, back when I started, we were calling it data science. And I really didn't imagine that I would either work in artificial intelligence or data or cybersecurity. I just knew that I loved science, and that's what I studied at university. And I wasn't really sure what to do with it, so I ended up working at a consulting company for a few years. Mostly on defence projects and security projects, which I thought was really interesting to sort of think about the perspective of data and its impact on Australian security. And then I worked in academia for a little while. I was a data scientist in gravitational astrophysics at the University of Sydney. And then I worked at a startup in the United States, in New York, and that's where I got into cybersecurity. So this entire time I was working as a data scientist, as a practitioner, but this is when suddenly cybersecurity became part of my role, and I was learning a lot more about the intersection of security and data science. I decided to do my master in cybersecurity, decided to do a PhD in machine learning security, and worked at the Australian government for a while, and now here we are. So I never imagined that I would be in artificial intelligence either, but certainly over my career, if there's anything I've noticed, it's that while it has changed a lot, like the technology has definitely changed, certainly over the last couple of years, and the emergence of tools like ChatGPT is really changing the landscape, but at its heart, it's still just data science, and data science techniques haven't really changed since the 1950s. You know, the same original methodologies that were proposed then are being extended on today, but they go back a long way in history. It's not like artificial intelligence suddenly existed only a couple of years ago, you know.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Is there a concept from those olden days, those in the 1950s, that people would be familiar with, even if they don't realize it, that we're using today in the AI space?
That's a really good question. I think most people are used to hearing about machine learning as a term, and machine learning and the kinds of algorithms that made up other buzzwords like deep learning and neural networks, these are all things that were proposed in the 1950s. And even the guy who coined the term artificial intelligence, John McCarthy, he was a cybernetics researcher in the 1950s, and he basically proposed artificial intelligence and his research as a way to sort of get more funding for his field and for other fields. And even then, it didn't really describe a technology, it described more of a goal. And I think ever since then, we've seen artificial intelligence is still really referring to a goal. The goalposts are always shifting around how we decide what constitutes artificial intelligence and what doesn't. And so people these days who, we hear about artificial intelligence a lot in the media, but, 60, 70 years ago, they were too. And they were just as cynical, just as excited, just as fearful. But while the technologies have changed a bit, the goalposts are always shifting, and the kinds of fear and the kinds of opportunities that artificial intelligence can bring about is, in some ways, much the same, but in other ways, it's definitely changing when it comes to the security space.
Yeah. So, of course, you said you run an AI security training company. What are the things that you find your customers want to learn about in that space? What's top of mind for them?
I find that while artificial intelligence security is my particular passion, I love talking about it, I love educating people about it, I find that usually when people have questions in artificial intelligence security, the challenge is that, first of all, they don't necessarily know what artificial intelligence is or why they want to know about it. They're mostly curious about what it even is and how they could use it, whether it's worth understanding more. And then certainly when it comes to the security aspect, usually when I tell people I work in AI security, they assume that I work in AI for cybersecurity, whereas in fact it's the total opposite. I work in the security of AI systems. So instead of thinking about using AI systems adversarially, I look at preventing humans from being adversaries and trying to attack or disrupt or disclose information from artificial intelligence systems. But there's a massive appetite to learn more about all of these areas, which I'm so excited by, but there's still a really long way to go because we do hear artificial intelligence sensationalized so much in the media, and so much of my work is really just myth busting a lot of the time and dispelling some of the rumors and some of the hype around what it is and what it isn't.
And for those of you who are interested in learning more about how we can use AI in the security space, keep watching other episodes in this series where we will bring in some more awesome folks who will talk about that. But Harriet, back to you.
I'm excited to watch those episodes too, by the way.
There you go. There you go. So I've got to ask you, can you tell me what is the most common, or maybe one or two most common myths that you need to bust about security and AI?
Oh my gosh. Well, the first one is, okay, so the most common conference talk I give, and I don't know if you would have seen this, Sarah, but it's around looking at Skynet from the Terminator movie franchise as an artificial intelligence system and how it was designed to be insecure and how we can basically hack it. And the reason that talk came about was because most of the time, as soon as I would talk about AI with people, the first word they would say was, oh, like Skynet.
Yes.
And I think people still have this idea that AI is just like it is in the movies, and that the main concerns we have around AI systems are the kinds of big existential threats we see movie plots based around, you know, that we're going to design an artificial intelligence system that somehow has access to all data and information possible and is, you know, omniscient, all-knowing, able to make lots of decisions and lots of impact. And, you know, it does raise existential threats and crises for humanity. And usually that's what most people are fearful of when they talk about AI safety. And that is definitely the biggest myth I like to bust, because as a practitioner, and there is some really cool AI work being done at, you know, frontier labs and organizations like Microsoft, don't get me wrong, but as a practitioner, most of the time I'm working with small to medium-sized organizations or larger corporate enterprises who are still trying to get through, you know, upgrading their legacy systems. And most AI I've seen in the wild is absolutely not AI, and it's absolutely not close to becoming an existential threat like Skynet.
So you said that some of the things you see with your customers is not AI. If it's not AI, can you tell me what it actually is?
That's a great question, because that is definitely a bias that I have as a practitioner in AI. I shouldn't even use the quotes. I was always a data scientist, and as a practitioner, AI was the term that we put on the marketing brochures or the PowerPoint slides. And practitioners would never refer to what we did as artificial intelligence. We would always refer to machine learning as the technological underpinnings of artificial intelligence, and particularly things like deep learning neural networks. And without wanting to get too much into buzzwords, I think the point of that is that going back to that concept of artificial intelligence being a goal and being more of an umbrella term, that many technologies may contribute to this goal, but as a practitioner, you wouldn't necessarily start from developing based on that goal, or at least it doesn't really refer to anything useful. I think the interesting thing about that, though, is that artificial intelligence and how it's being defined has changed quite a lot. When I started 10 years ago, like I said, we wouldn't refer to artificial intelligence at all. But last year, ISO, the International Standards Organization, defined artificial intelligence for the first time. And when an organization like ISO does it, you do kind of take notice and listen. And they've basically defined it in hand-wavy terms to be something that replaces a task that would normally require human-level intelligence, but done by a model. And while this is still very goal-oriented, it has made me have to reflect on my my need to get with the times and actually start using the term AI. And so that's why when I refer to my PhD, for example, I talk about it being in machine learning security, and my business is in AI security. It sort of reflects that difference between a practitioner, academic-focused field and how AI actually is a conglomeration of lots of technologies that do create an impact and are really important to a lot of organizations from a business sense.
Yeah, and I've got to ask you about this. Now, I know you've done a quite extensive YouTube series on hacking AI.
Extensive is a strong way of putting it.
I would call it extensive. It's much more extensive than any YouTube channel I've done.
By the time this comes out, it'll be better and more extensive.
But tell me, what drove you to start that, and what is it that you want people to take away from that? Because of course you must have seen an interest to have created that series.
We've already talked about how I worked as a data scientist for a number of years before starting my PhD, and the PhD was the first time that I became aware of the field of adversarial machine learning. And I started the PhD in 2021, and I started working as a data scientist in 2015, 2016. And basically, adversarial machine learning is the academic field that can sort of be considered the origin of a lot of offensive artificial intelligence techniques. Offensive in the sense of trying to hack the AI itself and not necessarily using AI adversarially. But it's this entire field of different kinds of attacks where you can either disrupt, deceive, or disclose information from AI systems, and basically looks at an AI system as an attack surface in its own right, as we would talk about in cybersecurity, where the kinds of defences and mitigations that are already applied to cyber and information systems don't protect AI systems against many attacks because they're very different. And they're baked into the system from the start because of the way that machine learning models are inherently different to rules-based cyber systems. And so I came across this field and I thought, how is it that I've been working as a data scientist and no one has ever considered the security of a model before? We'd always been taught, and it was always prioritized in the workplace to make sure that we are prioritizing accuracy and, depending on our budget or hardware constraints, efficiency or compute power. And people were starting to talk about safety from the perspective of bias and making sure that models weren't biased and that there was data privacy, but no one had ever talked about security. And so I was doing this PhD and I was sort of exploring these themes at the workplace that I was at, because I was doing it alongside my job. And then I realized that no one was talking about it. There wasn't a lot of educational content out there. There just didn't seem to be a lot of awareness at all, even among AI experts, that this was a field that, in my opinion, really needed to be taken seriously. And I guess that's why I started my company.
Yes.
I thought that it was important enough to really want to work on it full time and raise that awareness among organisations. And something that I also understood through that journey was that there was a real appetite among students and young people and people who are, young professionals, to learn about this kind of stuff as well. And so I started the YouTube channel and, a series of blogs and things, thinking about what I wish I'd known when I was starting my data science career, and the kinds of skills that I wish I'd been taught and the kinds of resources I wish I had access to. And it was really difficult starting out on YouTube because I feel too old to be a hashtag content creator. But it's actually been really fun. And for every video that I release that I'm not really sure whether it portrays the right information or whether I feel comfortable being myself online, all the comments I get where people are like, oh, this is the only content I can find like this. Thank you so much for doing this. Makes me feel like it's worth doing. And the other reason I think it's really important is because I'm a big consumer of content. Like, I love watching YouTube, Instagram, whether for educational or entertainment purposes. And I never really see many other women in tech who are also business owners. And I really wanted to sort of put out on the internet just a different model of a career where you can work in tech, you can, be a woman, you can be whoever you want to be, you can just lean into your own authentic self and do something that you're passionate about, because AI security is the only thing that I want to do. And I just hope that people who maybe want to work in AI security feel empowered and encouraged that it is a field that is growing and they can contribute to. And in fact, they should, because it is so new and emerging that we can use all the help we can get, and that they can do it authentically, whoever they are, because we're so new that everyone has the potential to learn the skills that they need to contribute right now. Yeah, so it's a work in progress, but it's a great journey to be on.
Yeah, I think all of security is a work in progress, though.
Yeah,
but AI security just more so at the moment, I think.
Yeah.
So you talked about, of course, that there are adversarial attacks about confusing and messing around with, I know that's a terribly untechnical term, messing around with AI models. And I would say, talking to customers that I have spoken to, there's quite a big focus on that. And also, but there's certain types of attacks that get a bit more kind of press time, I'd say like model poisoning, etc. But in your opinion, and I know this is a very rapidly changing field, are there any particular types of attacks out there that anyone who's considering using AI should be more concerned about than others, that we've seen more of in the wild, or that are more easy to do? Because we know certain kinds of attacks, even in the wider security sense, they require more effort and more resource, and so only particular types of threat actors would realistically do them. Do we have that in the AI security space?
That's a really great question, because that's something I think about a lot. I'm like, in AI security, what is a DDoS attack versus a Stuxnet, you know? And I think, first of all, the biggest vulnerability that most AI systems have is that they're just not very good, you know? And maybe an AI system, or like a machine learning system, didn't need to be used at all. Maybe it wasn't designed with the right data. It wasn't accurate enough. It wasn't sort of designed to fulfill the purpose or the business problem that it was meant to solve. That's the first thing I see. You know, a lot of organizations will just do an AI thing because it's buzzy and cool, and then they're introducing unnecessary vulnerabilities into their computer systems. But from an AI security sense, that's also a good question, because and even as you said in your question, you know, what is the right way of actually explaining these attacks? There really is so little literature on it, and there's no real best practice or way of threat modeling AI systems from a security sense just yet. And the way that I think about it, or the way that I usually term it, is in terms of the 3 Ds, and that is disrupt, deceive, and disclose. And the kinds of attacks that you would see in each of those buckets, I feel like I also need to say that artificial intelligence among most people is often equated with large language models, and that's not necessarily the case.
Yes.
There's lots of other AI systems as well, like computer vision, for example, and signals processing. So
I'm gonna have to ask you, as I am aware that AI systems are not just LLMs, but could you just briefly tell us what a couple of those other ones are? Because I think you're right that most people watching this will be largely thinking about LLMs.
And that is absolutely fair. And I think it's a great thing that large language models have brought AI to the fore a lot more. The classic example I like to lean into is computer vision, which is basically the ability of, you know, computers or AI systems to identify objects in pictures or video content. So maybe looking at an example like that from the perspective of the 3 Ds, and then leaning into some other kinds of AI from there. An example for a disruption-based attack would be if you have a self-driving car or an autonomous vehicle, and you sprinkle salt on the road, which was an attack that used to work a while back while those sorts of computer vision models were new, or you'd put some kind of sticker over a stop sign. You're basically perturbing the environment so that you're disrupting the model's ability to basically do its job. And in large language models, things like prompt engineering, from the sense of maybe jailbreaking a model or trying to get past its safeguards so that it gives you the wrong content, that's a way of disrupting that model as well. And then other artificial intelligence implementations are in, you know, basically every industry that has a lot of data is looking to employ some kind of machine learning solution. So whether that is signal processing, being able to automatically interpret comms, RF data, things like medical imaging, where they have a lot of signal data as well, and they're trying to automatically identify whether there's some kind of anomaly in an image or in a signal. Even in like trading in the stock market, you'd have machine learning models that are sort of trying to predict prices, and there's so many different kinds of machine learning implementations. And again, I'm switching to machine learning because you would technically call them artificial intelligence these days as well, but they're machine learning implementations at their core. I'm definitely waffling now. I just get stuck on the what is the artificial intelligence versus machine learning thing.
No, I think that's very important. And I think it's great that we can make the distinction, because I think even myself, I've just been using, definitely in the last year or so, AI.
I need to get used to doing that, though. I mean, I think it's a more encompassing term. You know, it means that more people can get involved in the conversation. So I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing either, though.
Yeah. So, Harriet, you mentioned there were 3 Ds. Can you tell us about the other ones?
Yes, I've only talked about 1 D. The other 2 Ds, deceive and disclose information. Deceive is very similar to disrupting an AI system, except you're doing it in a targeted way. So this is the classic adversarial machine learning example, which some of the viewers might be familiar with. But basically in 2013, while the idea of hacking algorithms has existed as long as algorithms have themselves, right? But the idea of creating specific attacks based on deep learning methods really rose to the fore around 2013, 2014. And the original example they gave was an image of a panda that was perturbed with specially crafted adversarial pixels so that it deceived a computer vision model looking at it into predicting that that image was instead a gibbon.
Yes, I actually have a security talk called Panda versus Gibbon. So it is
amazing.
It is the classic.
It is. It really is. Yeah, and it's evolved quite a lot since then, but the techniques are very similar, and it's when you think about applying it in other use cases now, like in video, for example, it's a lot more difficult, but you can imagine sort of the equivalent of a deep fake in real time, but specially crafted to deceive a model. And the third D is disclosing information. So this is far more analogous to some of the cybersecurity examples where obviously data privacy is really important. And especially in AI systems, you don't want the model to be able to disclose either data about the information about the training data or information about the model parameters itself, both because you don't want that information to be used to create and launch adversarial attacks against that model, but also because models represent such high IP value these days. You know, that could be millions of dollars worth of information lost as well.
Yeah. So on that, because obviously a lot of people, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that the majority of organizations and individuals, they wouldn't run their own AI platform with their own model because and train their own model just because it takes massive amounts of compute to do those things. And a lot of folks would probably be consuming some kind of third-party service and building on top of that. Do you have any advice for those people or those organizations? You know, what should they be looking for? What questions should they ask their provider? And what they should be concerned about? Because a lot of that, if we look at going into shared responsibility, sort of the things you're talking about around that model would probably in that scenario be the third-party provider underneath. So I guess for someone who's watching this who wants to start building an AI application using whatever third party it is, what would your advice be to them about how to start from that security side of things?
That's such a great question, because from my perspective, and there's quite a lot of perspectives on AI security and how to actually tackle it these days, but for me it comes down to risk. So whether you're creating your own in-house models or consuming third-party AI products, it's really important that an organization not just understands their own unique risk environment for their organization. You know, what kinds of use cases is that AI system being applied to? What is the severity of an incident? What is the likelihood of an incident occurring? But obviously, when you're using a third-party system, you place a lot of trust in the provider. And most providers these days are very cognizant of the AI security threat, and they do usually put in place some kind of testing, whether it's penetration testing is becoming more discussed. I wouldn't say common, but just certainly discussed. Red teaming of AI systems, and then transparency of the kinds of data and decisions and architecture of an AI system. And so I think that, honestly, from my perspective, I'm not scared of the rise of AI. I think it's a great thing. I think there is so much opportunity, and while there is definitely potential for it to be misused and attacked or hacked, and the way that that looks and the kind of impact that might have is really different for every organisation, we're certainly moving towards a more mature AI security approach, and most organisations are really cognizant of becoming more mature in their approach. We still have a bit of a way to go. So that's why I think it's really important that all practitioners and researchers in this space are working together to understand what kinds of attacks are happening in the wild, because there are attacks happening in the wild, and there are incident repositories full of real wild case studies of adversarial attacks. But talking about regulation and opt-in measures versus mandatory measures is something that is going to be a really big topic of conversation over the next few years, and will be a really interesting debate, I think, because while AI security has so many analogies to cybersecurity, and we can really look to cyber and information security as a model of how to ensure that incidents are managed well, like looking at data breaches and the impact of actually having a mandatory reporting scheme with financial penalties. That obviously made a big difference in forcing organisations to make sure that they have really secure practices. But the kinds of impact that AI systems have and their use cases, things like facial recognition, their application of military systems, thinking about the kinds of automation where you might not have a human in the loop. These are all additional questions that really need to be considered on top of the lessons learned that we already have from cybersecurity. But I am really encouraged by the amount of work that the entire AI community is putting into those questions.
Harriet, that is amazing. It's been wonderful to talk to you and get that amazing download of information. Of course, if this is a super interesting topic, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers would want to learn more. We've mentioned your YouTube channel, of course, but are there any other resources out there that if someone's wanting to get into this adversarial AI space that you would recommend people could go to?
So there is so much good work being done in the academic community, and that is really starting to filter into the professional community as well. And Microsoft's AI security risk framework was definitely one of those first really useful resources for enterprises to implement. But I really do encourage people who are interested in learning more about it or contributing their skill set to it. It really is such an emerging field that it really benefits from everyone's expertise, whether you're in AI or security or social sciences or whatever you happen to be in. And yeah, I echo that. Sarah, it was such a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no, you're very welcome. And thanks to all of you who are watching this. I hope that you've really enjoyed this episode. I'm having a great time talking to all these AI security experts. We've got much more to come, so stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.